Hello, Community Works enrichment students. My name is Miss Kristine, and I teach fashion design and illustration, and also sewing. Today is a practice sewing lesson for different stitches and just different little things you may want to know if you're putting together something, or if you've been practicing sewing since I've taught you. This is just a little prep on practicing how to do it accurately, how to do it neatly, and just some little examples you can put into your folder and refer back to when needing these particular stitches. And I'll do these from time to time in my lessons so that you can have like little things to collect, like a dictionary of sewing referrals, which I call it like the sewing dictionary that you're going to prepare for yourself. So today we're going to practice again on how to do circular sewing, how to do a straight stitch really neatly on two different seam allowances, how to make a bias tape and sew that bias tape on your fabric. And also, I think we're going to do a pivot stitch too. So most of the fabrics are going to cut a very small little piece fabrics that you're just going to collect as a sample. And then we'll put maybe multiple on some of those fabric of the exercises so that you can save on it. For this project, you're going to need muslin or a plain fabric, white or any plain type of fabric, so you can see your stitching, because that's important. The whole idea is to see the stitching to refer back to. You're going to need and as we go along with it, I'll tell you what to cut, because it doesn't have to be a perfect cut, but it has to be a neat cut, like neat enough so that you can actually show what the stitching is. A pencil for marking, a ruler, and you definitely need your sewing machine, and you need your thread. Okay, so you need at least a spool of thread. If you have a home sewing machine, you'll have a smaller spool of thread that's going to sit on top. Refer to your booklets if you have a sewing machine. I know some of my students have invested in getting sewing machines or have them and want to take them out and use them. So make sure you look at your booklet before using them. If you do not have a sewing machine and just want to walk yourself through by putting this in your journal or your sketchbook, the directions, that would be really great until you're able to sew with me again. All right, so when we get started, we're going to start with the curve stitch. Now, we did this stitch in a couple of lessons ago. If you haven't done that, we'll start now. So what we're going to do is actually two pieces of a semicircle. You don't have to make it big, or you can make it the size you want. So it's like a little crescent. It's a little semicircle you're going to cut out, and you're going to have two pieces of that, okay? Now everything we're going to have a seam allowance on it. So if you have a ruler on your actual sewing machine, you're going to look for the fourth of a half an inch stitch, and you're going to put the edge of this to the fourth of the half an inch. So we're going to do a fourth on this because this is a pretty small piece. If you have to go and mark it with the ruler, and I'll do that right now so you can see. You're just going to practice that stitch to make sure that you get that roundness of very, very curved and very, very neat. This is all a practice demo for everything. We're building upon, like I said, you'll do these lessons just to build upon a dictionary as we do certain projects within my sewing lessons. When you start to make stuff, it'll start to get easier for you as you practice little demos. So I'm going to put a fourth all around this. I'm taking the ruler, and actually I'm curving my ruler. This is good to have in sewing and drafting, is a see-through ruler, because it actually measures down in increments of these eighths, and it builds on a fourth and a half, and then you can see right through it just to mark around it. Okay, and what you do is just go around in your ruler, and you do that. So as I mark, you're going to actually, if you need to break and mark it, you're going to mark your fourth around here, which I did. Okay, you're marking your fourth, and then you're going to go to the sewing machine. I'm going to dim that light a little bit, it's a little bright. You're going to get started by putting that edge to the fourth. Now, like I said in a previous lesson, to do a curve, you want to make sure, because we're not going to actually sew, so I'm going to hold this up. We're not actually going to sew this part because I want you to turn it over. Don't sew the straight part. We're only concentrating on the curve part, okay? Just the curve part. So you're going to sew around the curved part on the fourth seam allowance. So this is teaching you how to follow the fourth seam allowance. And remember, you have to use your force to do a curve. So as you practice this is a good practice for your fingers to actually follow through. If you have to pause and lift your needle, go ahead, do that. And this is one thing you can include. And I would suggest that you actually mark these little sewing panels as what you learned on it, so that when you refer back to it in your little sewing dictionary, that you know what you did here. So here is your curved stitch all around. Using a colored stitch will be good. I just know that I had white on mine, so I just use that as is. But it will allow you to see the stitch if you have a colored one. So I do suggest colored stitching. Then I'm going to mark it as curved stitch, CS. But now I need to put, when you do a curved stitch, to give it a little ease, when you turn it over, you want to do a little slits in it. You don't want to go too much into the, you don't want to hit the seam allowance because you don't want to put a hole in it. So you're going to do it right above the seam allowance and do these little slits, and I'll show you in a second. So when you turn it over, it eases out the circle. And then you do that. Okay, so you see these little slits? They're not touching the seam allowance, but they're opening it up. Just little slits. And you have to be careful because sometimes those scissors will run through. So when you turn it over, you're able to punch it out and then you can iron it. So you see how you open this up? It's important that you open it up. Anytime you do a lining or any type of opening up, you have to have this open. This has to be open, the seam, so when you iron it down, it's nice and rounded. So you see how this round part is nice and rounded? That's what you want to practice. So this is something you can put in your little book. I would suggest you get the folders that are the see-through folders that you can put in a binder, and then you could put it in with the actual write-up, because you need to keep a journal and you need to go through each step of what I'm showing you. Draw it out in a little drawing and then put little arrows next to it on what you have to do to create this little piece. So when you get to a point where you're doing a project that, oh, I have to do this little circular thing. What did I have to do to make it look so rounded? Then you go back to it. Okay, next one is a straight stitch. So when we do a straight stitch, we're going to actually take a little square. You can do a 6x6 square, anything like that. If you need to cut it out right now, go ahead and cut it. In a straight stitch, I'm just going to draw a line. This is going to allow you to form a straight stitch and practice your stitches along. So actually, not only we're going to put a straight stitch, but you're going to be learning your pivot stitch. You're going to practice your pivot stitches, because these are all technical stitches that actually can become very, they can become hard to do if you're actually doing a garment. And you want to make sure that you practice them before you start doing anything so you can get a hang of it. So here I'm going to put the actual pivot stitch, which looks like an L, and the actual straight stitch. Okay, so either it could be a front L or a backwards L. It doesn't matter, just as long as it's some kind of cornered line, okay, so that you can stitch. We're going to start with the straight stitch. You are to practice doing a back tack at the top and the bottom to make sure that you are following the line completely straight. So when you start at that line, you're going to put that needle at the beginning of the line, back tack, go straight down your line, and then back tack at the end. Okay, once you have that done, you'll see how that stitch is looking straight. You followed on your line. Next, you're going to go to the pivot line and do the same thing. This is good to do several times. Just because I'm showing you once on here, do these little practices several times, and it'll allow you to get used to controlling your fabric, moving your fabric on down. So when you go down the line, when you get to that corner, if you can see where my hand is doing this, I am going to walk myself very slowly without really touching the pedal where that needle goes in the corner. The needle has to go in the corner. When you have that up, You want to lift your foot wherever your lever is for your foot. If it's in the back for the home sewing machine or if it's in the front, you're going to lift that lever. You're going to turn your fabric to the direction where you drew your line going to the going out, and then you're going to follow that line down in that L shape. You're going to make sure your foot is down though, because you have to have your foot down if you're going to start sewing again. Those are all the things you need to do. You're going to go all the way down. You're going to follow through on that line. You're going to back tack. You're going to lift your foot, bring it out. And then you've completed your pivot stitch. Like I said, you can practice this many times on many pieces of fabric. It'll allow you to learn how, when you get ready to do a project, or if I have a project in any of my segments, that it'll be so much easier to sew because you've practiced how to do it and you maneuvered your hands on the sewing machine. So next thing we're going to do is a little bit more advanced, and that is creating your own bias tape. Well, bias tape is actually something that goes around your fabric if you wanted to have it finished. If you didn't want to do a French seam, which is a turnover twice to clean the inside of your garment, or if you didn't want to line it, you have bias tape. They do sell bias tape, but sometimes people want to use the same fabric for their bias tape to create a very special look to their garment. So when you do, everything on the bias is on the diagonal. The diagonal has a bit of stretch to it. You always take like the square of the fabric, so you're gonna get a nice size square of fabric. You can do an 8x8 with this one, and you're gonna actually put it into a triangle form like this, okay? Once you have it into a triangle form, you're going to draw out about an inch down across here, and you're going to cut along that line. So let me do that now. This is a real good idea when you're trying to finish something and you don't have any bias tape and you have your fabric. So when you draw that line across, you're going to cut that piece off, cut that point off of there, and you'll just have this top. And that's what you're going to concentrate on. Now, an iron is very necessary in being involved here, but I'm just going to demonstrate how you're going to do it because this will actually fold easily. So you see how this folds really nicely at the top? You're going to make sure you straighten out these edges too. Take those points going out because you want to make sure your bias tape has a nice crisp look, because we're going to add it to one of these pieces of fabric. So you also can put that in your diagram. Draw all of this out. You should be drawing the triangle out, how to cut it, everything in your journal. It's good to keep notes when doing design because when you refer back to it, it'll be much easier to understand. So we're going to cut those off. And then I'm going to show you how to fold the bias tape so that you can add it on to a piece of fabric. So any piece of plain fabric, just like you have for your stitching, you could do a 6x6. And this was the one you cut the 8x8 to make the triangle. So once you have that cut, you see how straight that is? You have it already folded once, but in that fold, you're going to actually lay it on the iron, and then that middle part, that little part there, you're going to fold one side into it, and you're going to fold the other side into it. And you see how they meet? They meet. Then you're going to fold again and push them together, and that creates your bias strip, okay? So this is going to create your bias strip in the fold, okay? So once that creates, now I'm going to show you again. In the middle, you're going to fold one end to the middle and fold the other to the middle. And then you're going to fold those two together, okay? And that creates your bias strip. Now, when you're setting it onto the fabric to clean the edge, it's always good to clean the edge or add a little flair to an outfit. You're going to insert it. Once you have it ironed down, you're going to insert it on one side. But make sure that one side's a little bit bigger than the other, so when you do your top stitch, it's catching from the bottom. So when I do that, you're going to need your pins and stuff to do that. And then, but if you fold really nicely, I'm going to show you how it's going to stitch, okay? We're going to go onto the sewing machine, in the bias part. I'm going to stitch carefully. I'm going to put it here, and you're going to edge stitch it. So you're going to go a little bit to the edge, but I would suggest you pin so you can put it on here because it's a small piece. I'm actually folding it on top. You're going to edge stitch it along the edge so that you can cover it, and this is making your own bias tape. So once that's complete and you cut it off, I sewed from here but cut everything on this side from it. So you're going to iron that out, and that is what cleans the sides of your garment and the inside if you want to put bias strips. So you can make your own bias strips, okay? All right, now that you have all of those, label them, put them in folders with your notes, and then you can refer back to them as you start learning different sewing lessons or techniques. So this was our practice lesson for today in sewing. Please take time out to practice these steps so that you're comfortable with stitching. If you're having any trouble, just keep going over it. It's always something that you can practice when sewing, and always something you can perfect. All right, for the next sewing class, we'll probably do a project. But until then, I hope that you enjoyed and you keep practicing if you enjoy sewing. Bye.